It's so wild watching the federal government go through the goalpost changes that I experience. They quickly dropped all notion that they were actually actively going after criminals to actually we just want to deport every Mexican. There's a new legal
it's
on
an
the
emergency, rebellion, an insurrection, and clearly an invasion of Mexicans. Just look at all those flags.
Well, they're not a city of immigrants, they're a city of criminals.
According to Donald Trump, Los Angeles is a war zone, and the only thing that can restore order is thousands of soldiers and hundreds of Marines patrolling the streets. Also, the only way to stop a fire is by lighting a match. Last Friday, President Trump sent heavily armored ICE agents in to conduct immigration raids in densely populated neighborhoods in and around Los Angeles without informing local law enforcement or city authorities. He claimed to be liberating the city from dangerous migrants, the worst of the worst, including dozens of textile factory workers, a bunch of laborers outside a Home Depot, and this guy selling fruit on the street corner. Protests immediately erupted across the city and were predominantly peaceful, but a few of them were not, including the downtown protest where about 5 parked robo-taxis were lit on fire, which, if you know anybody from Los Angeles, that's kind of a thing they do there, especially when the Lakers win the championship. But that didn't stop the Trump administration from jumping at the opportunity to grab power away from the states, even when the Constitution pretty clearly forbids it. He's also mobilized the National Guard outside of his authority, threatened to arrest Governor Gavin Newsom, and mobilized 700 active-duty Marines to support ICE, rounding up even more immigrants. Yikes. On Friday, June 6th, ICE conducted a series of immigration raids in the Los Angeles metropolitan area. According to Representative Nanette Barragan, they're going to keep this up for a month.
So we've been told to get ready for 30 days of enforcement. 30 days of ICE enforcement.
Agents swept multiple locations in the city and took at least 118 people into custody, but 3 locations became particular flashpoints. The first was a garment factory called Ambiance Apparel in the Fashion District. Agents entered the building and interrogated the workers inside, but while that was going on, a crowd of angry protesters surrounded the building. Those protesters included David Huerta, leader of the Service Employees International Union, better known as SEIU, one of the biggest labor unions in the country, who was arrested for impeding ICE agents. Bill Asalee, the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of California, tweeted out a photo of Huerta after he'd been slammed to the ground in the back of a cruiser with the promise to arraign him on Monday. Ah, for the good old days, when the Justice Department manual's instruction to prosecutors that they should not make any statement or disclose any information that could have a substantial likelihood of materially prejudicing a case actually meant something. See also Rule 3.6 of the California Rules of Professional Conduct.
That is one of the, okay. When the Trump administration does shit, you can either package it under stupidity or purposeful cruelty. Sometimes it's both. But that is stupidity. It's cruelty, but it's also incredibly stupid. Because no matter how cruel you want to be, materially prejudicing a court case that the Department of Justice has by having the Attorney General come out and say some insane shit is going to literally drop the court case instantly. She did this. Pam Bondi did this not only with Huerta, but she also did this with Kilmar Abrego Garcia. In an effort to win the battle of public opinion, they greatly prejudiced the way that the public would receive this information by making statements, by making claims and statements about the guiltiness, the perceived guiltiness and the criminality of a person that they were charging. That right there makes it a much easier case to declare a mistrial over. And they still keep doing it because they're stupid.
But where were we? Oh, right. ICE agents, FBI, and Los Angeles Police Department cops dispersed the crowd outside the garment factory using pepper spray and took about a dozen people to the Metropolitan Detention Center. Now, members of Congress have the right to inspect federal detention facilities. It's right there in Section 527 of the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2024. And yet, multiple California representatives were turned away when they tried to enter that facility. Meanwhile, a huge crowd of protesters assembled outside because SEIU has 750,000 members, and they were pissed about the raids, and they were really pissed about Huerta being taken into custody. Now, the vast majority of those protesters were peaceful, but some of them were not. So ICE called LAPD, and the cops came and they caused the crowd to disperse. And perhaps if ICE had said they were going to stage raids in a major metro area or even told the police that they'd picked up Huerta, LAPD could have been on the scene.
No, I can't believe she's a LA lawyer and saying this. LAPD is not supposed to clear out the area in collaboration with ICE. Part of the reason why ICE did not inform law enforcement, local law enforcement, I suspect, is for that reason. I think it was more so to make a point and to create chaos in general. But Los Angeles is a sanctuary city and California is a sanctuary state. So I don't think that they can collaborate like that. There's been so far no collaboration, if I'm not mistaken, between ICE and local law enforcement.
Sooner rather than arriving after things were already out of control. But ICE was not trying to work with local authorities, which is why no one knew that they would be massing forces for a raid on Saturday near the Home Depot in Paramount, a working-class Latino suburb southeast of LA. But the ICE guys stick out like a sore thumb. And so, of course, people spotted them and spread the word. An angry crowd began to form around the industrial park where the agents were massing, which is hardly surprising in a town that is 82% Hispanic and 32% immigrant. And so, before long, things got totally out of hand, with kids throwing rocks and water bottles at the caravan of ICE vehicles as it fled the town. And no one is condoning violence. But it is important to understand that these are communities where ICE is doing stuff like going into elementary schools and trying to interrogate first graders. So people are scared and they are angry.
Okay. The fact that a libbed up lawyer is saying this is really good. Under normal circumstances, no liberal will ever talk about the standard of violence that the state applies to civilians. They would never talk about it like that. They hyper focus on the retaliatory violence or the retaliatory response. Like, I don't even want to call it violence. Like water balls at a car. Like, get out of here. Like they would hyper focus on that, hone in on that, and constantly hit that. But the very fact that she's also talking about like what kind of provocations took place in terms of the much higher amount of violence coming directly from the state, and how inevitable it was that there would be a response to said violent actions by ICE. It's good. It means that it means I think more liberals also recognize this unfair dynamic.
After the raids and the continued detention of Huerta, there was widespread protest across the city on Sunday and Monday. But by then, the LAPD had interposed themselves between ICE and the protesters, and they were the ones firing round after round of tear gas and pepper balls and less lethal rubber bullets, including at this Australian reporter. They literally just shot this woman for no reason. Here's the LAPD on horseback beating a protester, which is a good reminder that the last time the National Guard was on the streets of LA was in 1992 after police brutally beat a man named Rodney King. That attack, which was caught on tape, ignited a firestorm, and when the police were acquitted by a jury of the assault, it sparked widespread rioting. In what became known as the Rodney King riots, looting and arson were rampant. 63 people were killed, more than 2.
Like that is more akin to a riot. Okay? Like what's going on in LA right now is not that. And given how big Los Angeles is, I wasn't there, obviously, in 1992. I was 1 year old, but I suspect that even back then, there were probably other parts of the city that did not even experience anything. That's how big LA is, chat. This is not even to say that like this wasn't a riot or whatever. It's just to try to get you to understand how vast of a land the Los Angeles greater metropolitan area occupies.
2,000 were injured and 12,000 were arrested. The city suffered more than $1 billion in property damage, and those were 1992 dollars. But in 1992, Los Angeles authorities knew that if the verdict in the Rodney King trial came back not guilty, the city was going to be furious, and so Mayor Tom Bradley preemptively put the National Guard on standby and called them up on the same night of the verdict when the violence erupted. Local officials are pretty good at knowing what the vibe is in their own city, and they're also pretty good at predicting how things are going to go down. And in the case of Los Angeles last Friday, they knew that the LAPD was well equipped to deal with the gathering protests, even though the ICE raids were sprung on them without warning. And what they got was thousands of peaceful demonstrators in a couple of locations and a handful of Waymo robo-taxis torched because their cameras effectively provide surveillance footage for the police.
That's crazy. Again, talking about Waymo playing a role in police surveillance, like, wow.
LAPD has extensive experience with crowd control in its own streets, and it restored order within hours of being called in, albeit by shooting rubber bullets at protesters and reporters indiscriminately. And with all love for Californians, they do know how to stage an actual riot, like when UCLA won the championship in 1995, or when the Lakers beat the Celtics in the NBA Finals in 2010, or last year when the Dodgers beat the Yankees in Game 5. So to paraphrase Crocodile Dundee, that's not a riot, this is a riot. Here, the vast majority of Angelenos just went about their business and there's no widespread violence or looting. Police have matters well in hand, like what are the troops going to do in LA? Get brunch at Cantor's on Fairfax before hitting up Griffith Observatory? Meanwhile, Donald Trump spent the weekend firing off incendiary social media posts blaming California politicians for not putting out the fire fast enough after ICE lit it. He said, if Governor Gavin Newsom of California and Mayor Karen Bass of Los Angeles can't do their jobs, which everyone knows they can't, then the federal government will step in and solve the problem. Riots and looters, the way it should be solved. Trump's border czar Tom Homan threatened to arrest Governor Newsom and Mayor Bass for crossing that line, whatever that means.
I'll say it about anybody. You cross that line, it's a felony to knowingly harbor and conceal an illegal alien. It's a felony to impede law enforcement from doing their job.
The president said he thought that was a great idea. What are they going to arrest him for, Mr. President?
A crime has he committed? I think his primary crime is running for governor because he's done such a bad job.
And then Trump signed a memorandum to the Secretary of Defense for the protection of Department of Homeland Security functions. He said violent protests threaten the security of and significant damage to federal immigration detention facilities and other federal property. To the extent that protests or acts of violence directly inhibit the execution of the laws, they constitute a form of rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States. Think about that for a second. He's saying that protests, civil disobedience, constitutes rebellion against the United States. I mean, by that logic, this is a rebellion, but not this, of course. He went on, in light of these incidents and credible threats of continued violence, I hereby call into federal service members and units of the National Guard under 10 U.S.C. Section 12406 to temporarily protect ICE and other United States government personnel and to protect federal property at locations where protests against these functions are occurring or are likely to occur based on current threat assessments and planned operations. And he directed Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth to call up at least 2,000 troops for a minimum of 60 days. Okay, there is a whole lot to unpack here. Section 12406 allows the president to federalize the National Guard in certain limited circumstances. That is, he can turn state militias into soldiers under the command of the federal government, not under command of the states. The first of those circumstances is when we are under foreign invasion, which we clearly are not. Although Trump says the city of Los Angeles is under migrant invasion and a whole bunch of his supporters are pointing to the presence of Mexican flags at the protest like it's evidence of something illegal.
They were literally out there protesting, carrying a foreign flag. That is absolutely insane. I mean, they're not just peaceful protests.
I can't believe I'm just going to do a bounce with him. I cannot comprehend how big of a someone could be to look at people waving Mexico flags, like Chicanos in the streets of Los Angeles, waving Mexico flags and going, this is an invasion. It's like, dude, what I mean, I don't think they believe this. Like, that's the thing. Are there people who believe this? Yes. There are people that are that stupid, but not a single person that went to college, which is every single one of these Republican senators and every single one of these Republican politicians and Donald Trump, none of them really believe that waving the Mexico flag implies invasion. And that in and of itself is already so stupid because they're like, that is beyond, like, they're not even complaining about like the burning Waymos. They've already moved the needle They've already moved the goalposts of like what is a permissible form of protest versus not to. If you are of Mexican heritage, of Mexican background, as an American citizen, if you wave the Mexico flag, that is a threat. That is a danger. You are actually invading the country. That's psychotic.
These are illegals. These are exactly why the president is trying to secure our border.
It is not illegal to fly a flag, not even a rebel flag. And lots of people in America fly flags celebrating their heritage. It's not like we freak out every March because we think we're being invaded by Ireland. Pointing to Mexican Americans waving Mexican flags like it's some kind of crime it's just racist. I'm sorry. That's all it is. The second circumstance where state militias can be federalized is in the case of rebellion, which Trump has already defined downward to anyone disobeying the law. But is there an actual rebellion here against the government? I mean, clearly not. The third circumstance is when the president is unable with regular forces to execute the laws of the United States, which is obviously not the case. ICE arrested more than 100 immigrants over the weekend, and a whopping 6 of them were actually criminals, not just seamstresses and roofers and gardeners trying to earn a living and take care of their families. But okay, let's look at the last part of this statute. It says orders for these purposes shall be issued through the governors of the states, which certainly did not happen. California Governor Gavin Newsom did not approve this call-up of the state's National Guard. So we're batting 1,000 here. But let's go back to that declaration, because protests are First Amendment protected activity, and Trump is assembling thousands of troops to protect federal property at locations where protests against these functions are occurring or are likely to occur. So we could be looking at troops stationed anywhere in the country based on the Secretary of Defense's suspicion that there might be protests there. Not violence or rioting or obstruction, just protests, and for an unlimited length of time. After he signed the proclamation, President Trump immediately congratulated himself for restoring order to Los Angeles, despite the fact that no National Guardsmen were even on the ground yet. Pete Hegseth called the garment workers and landscapers ICE had rounded up a dangerous invasion facilitated by criminal cartels, aka foreign terrorist organizations, and a huge national security risk. And he threatened to put active duty Marines on the streets of LA, a suggestion Governor Newsom called deranged. But since then, Hegseth made good on that threat, mobilizing 700 Marines for deployment in Los Angeles. What he's going to do with those Marines is another matter. Newsom tweeted out photos of the California Guardsmen Trump summoned to Los Angeles sleeping on the floor since the government has made no provision to feed or house them, in contrast to the ICE agents who have been...
It's so wild watching the federal government go through the goalpost changes that I experience in my chat on a day-to-day basis from the dumbest gray names of all time. Like, they very quickly went from undocumented migrants are all criminal monsters that we must physically remove them from U.S. soil to, well, you know, this garment manufacturer and this like the 3 people graduating from high school literally have to be deported instantly. And that's good because, well, they violated the law. They violated the law by coming into the country illegally. And it's like that's the type of I had to work through to get dumb defenders of Trump in my chat to admit to. Like, they would be like, well, they're all criminals, like we have to deal with criminals, and then I would tell them they're not criminals, and that the overwhelming majority have no crimes whatsoever beyond like a crossing of a boundary, which is again basically a little bit more than a jaywalking crime, right? It's like a moving violation, right? It's a misdemeanor. The idea that if you're super rich, deportations don't affect you. Wait, what? Yeah, if you're super rich, a lot of things don't affect you, but you should still care about your community. You should still care about the safety and security of other humans. Depending on the severity of the crime, a moving violation could be more severe than a border crossing. Think about that. It should not be met with this level of violent retaliation from the state. Yeah, overstaying your visa is a civil offense, not a criminal one too. So basically, they quickly dropped all notion that they were actually actively going after criminals, and this is actually an Immigration Enforcement Act born out of the immediate need to deal with the crimes. To actually, we just want to deport every Mexican, which was always the truth anyway. Which was always the truth. And here we are.
Put up at local hotels where they are apparently interrogating the housekeepers making up their rooms and the kitchen staff demanding ID and proof of citizenship. But with the protests being almost universally peaceful, there's very little for the National Guard to do. As David Dian of the American Prospect wrote, the protests are largely clergy members and local politicians occupying public space with crowds chanting slogans and singing "We Shall Overcome." The phalanxes of police and soldiers sent to keep the peace are more or less superfluous, which is good because there's not a lot those soldiers can legally do. Under the Posse Comitatus Act, it's illegal to use the military to execute the laws. That means the government can't use the military to enforce immigration laws or police civilians unless... Over the weekend, California politicians urged protesters to stay peaceful. Gavin Newsom tweeted, "The federal government is taking over the California National Guard and deploying 2,000 soldiers in Los Angeles, not because there is a shortage of law enforcement, but because they want a spectacle. Do not give them one. Never use violence. Speak out peacefully." Senator Adam Schiff warned that there is nothing President Trump would like more than a violent confrontation with protesters to justify the unjustifiable, invocation of the Insurrection Act or some form of martial law. The fear here is that Trump will use minor incidents of violence as a pretext to pull the fire alarm and declare an emergency. And remember, he's claiming emergency authorization to seize Congress's tariff authority and deport migrants without due process, so probably a safe bet. Here, the emergency would be an insurrection, empowering Trump to call into federal service such of the militia of any state and use such of the armed forces as he considers necessary to enforce those laws or to suppress the rebellion. That's the Insurrection Act, which is an exception to the Posse Comitatus Act. The Insurrection Act would allow the president to call in the military and use soldiers to conduct immigration raids. So if Section 12406 allows the National Guard to protect ICE, the Insurrection Act allows the troops to become ICE. That would effectively militarize law enforcement and allow the president to occupy an American city, which is why California's leaders were so freaked out. And there are strong signals that the military is preparing to act in a law enforcement capacity. Fox News is airing footage.
Being in the U.S. illegally is a civil matter and it's not a broken law like crossing the border illegally, which is a misdemeanor. Returning after a deportation is a felony. You would have to prove they crossed the border illegally. Yeah. So many people overstay their visas or even cross the border and apply for an asylum seeker status, which is legal, by the way. Like, you have the authorization. You're not a legal permanent resident, but you have the authorization to be in the country. But even then, there are so many people who just like visa overstay, don't do any crimes, become members of the community, get married, and are basically left in legal limbo in terms of like getting citizenship. And it's incredibly frustrating to make it seem as though these guys are like undesirable criminals when they give so much in return for so little, under so much legal scrutiny. I hate it. I hate it. It's completely unacceptable. The way we treat migrants in this country is disgusting. Here's the reality. There is already a level of exploitation that exists automatically when you bring in people from other countries that have lower living standards or a currency exchange that greatly benefits the United States of America. Okay? Even if these guys were coming in legally as legal migrants, they would still play a role in depressing wages. Okay? Depressing wages for the documented labor force. Except in America, our unlimited greed is so severe, so perverse, that not only do we do that, but then also on top of that, we have an endless sea of undocumented migrants that we refuse to offer documentation to have a permanent, exploitable labor underclass. It is crazy. It's actually insane. It's pure greed. Like, in terms of legal migration patterns into the UK, a lot of people in England were frustrated with Polish migrant workers, like not even migrant workers at the time, but like under the EU, a lot of Polish people were coming into the UK and they were offering a cheap alternative, like a more affordable alternative to labor, as opposed to the, Britain born. Right. And of course, the government, instead of saying we're going to do price parity to ensure that everyone actually gets the same prices, they didn't do anything about it. And the right-wing reactionary forces took advantage of that anger and really pushed that button, which then led to Brexit, famously. That is a form of exploitation that should be addressed by the federal government. But in America, even that form of exploitation is not enough, that we have undocumented migrants that we refuse to offer proper authorization to. We keep them in legal limbo deliberately. We keep them in legal immigration limbo deliberately so that they are even more exploitable than the migrant workers that come in and have the proper authorization that would still be exploitable as a direct consequence of their living standards back home in comparison to their living standards in America, and also the currency exchange that favors migrant workers getting and the higher pay that you get here in the United States of America that you can send back home allows even documented migrant laborers, allows companies to take advantage of even documented migrant laborers, which then has a capacity to lower or depress wages overall across the board. The only solution to this is unions. The only solution to this is federal regulation to ensure that there is payment parity in the same way that I advocated for with H-1B visas. But right-wing reactionary forces that actually don't care about the economic considerations all that much, but simply have an ideological position that they feel is disruptive to the moral fabric of a white Western nation, white nationalists and white supremacists is who I'm talking about. They use this argument as a further justification to draw anger towards migrants. But now that we have the Trump administration back in charge, it's moved beyond that, where they're openly ran on claiming that temporary protected status recipients, Haitian migrants that had the proper work clearance and the proper authorization to be on U.S. soil, work clearances that they got from Trump as well when he was the president last time, same with the Venezuelans, were immediately considered illegal aliens occupying the country, invading the country. They were lied about. If you're Venezuelan, you're Tren de Aragua. If you're Haitian, you're eating cats and dogs. And then they won. Then the group that did that won. Partially they won because the Democrats did not mount a significant response against these Republicans and their ridiculous statements, these ridiculously racist statements.
Of the Marines training to arrest and subdue civilians.
The reality is here, we got hooligans running around and they are causing undue harm to police, and the police need to be backed up.
Hooligans? We're calling out the National Guard for hooligans now? First of all, the LAPD is clearly not overwhelmed and was able to disperse the crowd.
Yeah, the LAPD is already a military force in and of itself. There's a reason why people can't even figure out which units are being deployed against who. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, is that the National Guard? Nope, that's just the LA Sheriff's Department. They have the same here, basically.
Without much difficulty. In fact, LAPD Chief Jim McConnell put out a statement making it very clear that dumping Marines in the middle of the city is very much not wanted. He said, the Los Angeles Police Department, alongside our mutual aid partners, have decades of experience managing large-scale public demonstrations, and we remain confident in our ability to do so professionally and effectively. Second, the president is only supposed to be federalizing state militias in cases of a total breakdown of the rule of law, which just isn't happening here, and it's a gross violation of state sovereignty to take away its authority to police its own citizens, which is something DHS Secretary Kristi Noem understood last year when Joe Biden was in the White House. But that was then, and this is now. According to the San Francisco Chronicle, Noem is asking the Pentagon to authorize troops to detain, that is, arrest people.
Mutual aid partners, anarchists are never beating the allegations. I'm sorry. This is the one time where there is no anti-anarchist sentiment allowed. Okay? They can be as crusty as they want. They can be as showerless as they want. No anti-anarchist sentiment allowed in this chat. Okay? I'm putting a curfew on shitting on anarchists, saying that they don't know how to read, saying that if they knew how to read, they would no longer be anarchists, saying that they smell bad, saying that they're crusty, saying that the only friends that they have are cats. All of those things that many of you are saying, not me, you are saying that. Okay? Right now, you are not allowed to say those things because this is the anarchist time to shine, if we're being real. They are so well organized, surprisingly enough, with mutual aid and with appropriate tactics that it's impossible to shit on anarchists in times like this, okay? This is part of the reason why I always say, like, this is the moment where it matters, and anarchists are always in the front line in moments that matter. No, I did not get the press pass. I don't think the LASD is going to give me a press pass, and I don't even think I need it anyway.
Which is a core law enforcement activity. So either she's asking the Defense Department to violate the Posse Comitatus Act, or she's preparing to be on a different legal footing. Trump's Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, is openly calling it an insurrection, and so is Trump. But California is a big state, and it's got the resources to fight. First, Governor Newsom called Homan's thuggish bluff.
Has been here 10 years. The fear, the horror. The hell is this guy? Come after me, arrest me. Let's just get it over with. Tough guy. You know, I don't give a damn. But I care about my community. I care about this community. The hell are they doing? These guys need to grow up. They need to stop. And we need to push back. And I'm sorry to be so clear, but that kind of bloviating is exhausting.
Thanks, Gavin. Then he filed a lawsuit in the Northern District of California. That case, appropriately captioned Newsom v. Trump.
Yeah, he lost aura after being muted for 5 minutes. I hate that these kinds of stunts paired up with pretty privilege unironically work in favor of Gavin Newsom. He is a despicable monster of epic proportion. And everything he said right there about Donald Trump, like, or everything he said about how much he cares about his community or whatever is an abject lie. And people that live in California know it is a lie. We just simply have no other option other than like Adolf Hitler's reanimated corpse that runs against Gavin Newsom. So I hate that like liberals are getting on board on the Gav train. They're getting on board with Gav train. Choo choo, get on the Gav train. I don't like it. Also, Trump said in theory Gavin Newsom should be charged, which is so lame. Just charge him. Just arrest him, dude. I mean, actually don't, because then you're going to make him a national hero.
Gavin Newsom?
Well, he's not doing a good job. You know, arrest, what does that mean? He's not doing a good job.
Charge him?
Well, in theory, you could, I guess. You know, it's almost like a dissipation of duty. Nobody's ever seen anything like that.
Are you going to arrest Gavin Newsom?
Well, he's not doing a good job.
Yeah, no, he's being a he's being a. So I also want to say that Gavin is like Godzilla and hate him for how he destroyed the city, but then Mothra shows up and that is so perfect. I don't even feel comfortable giving him any positive affirmation. God, I hate him so much. I hate Gavin. I mean, obviously I hate Trump a lot more than Gavin, but fuck, he is so ass. He is so ass, and I am truly terrified of what it would look like if he was leading the charge. Oh my God, America would be firmly committed to homosexual fascism as opposed to homophobic fascism. Gavin Newsom would be arming the suburbs with AR-15s like Itamar Ben-Gvir to assassinate homeless people, okay? He would be like, all right, we're implementing a national purge day where you can go out and violently kill any homeless person that you see. Actually, National Purge Day was so successful, we've decided to make it once a month. Why is Newsom bad? I don't know anything about him. Gavin Newsom is a repulsive monster when it comes to combating the housing crisis in his state against the wishes of the majority of his voters, by the way. And also simultaneously, the homelessness crisis that is born out of that is also something that he refuses to deal with in the appropriate ways. Newsom wants cities to force homeless Californians to move camp every 3 days. That's him personally engaging in a sweep. Anyway, a lot of people also, it's weird because on the one side, he's ass on this, but low key, he does a couple things that are actually in favor of criminal justice reform. So on that issue, he's actually not the worst, even though California is a horrible punitive penal colony, basically, has one of the worst state prison structures in the country. Having said that, he has taken the initiative of like reducing the the number of prisoners, right? Like, and he gets shit on a lot for some of the good things that he does. But or, you know, protecting abortion, things like that. And up until this last election cycle, even, you know, protecting gay stuff, like queer stuff. Unfortunately, he is the worst at an issue that matters the most, which is, well, he is Mr. Veto Pen, first of all. Okay. You know how people talk about auto pen with Joe Biden? He has the iron fist pen. Okay. He fists every good bill that comes his way through the goddamn state legislature. He will literally deny he will deny any initiative implemented in his state against for-profit healthcare. Same when it comes to any sort of initiative to combat homelessness, other than like this violent response. It's terrible. Are you upset because of how he handled the rail? I mean, the rail situation is yet another obvious example of the annoying neoliberal predisposition of deep blue enclave states, okay? California and New York basically are the Fedayeen. Like, the Democratic Party of these two states is basically like Mujahideen of neoliberalism. They are the Fedayeen of neoliberalism. They are the Salafists who learn neoliberalism in the madrasas from an early age and will literally strap themselves with improvised explosive devices and blow themselves up in honor of defending neoliberalism. Okay? It is alarming. The private-public partnership in the state of California basically is the most domineering force that renders every government initiative that was democratically voted on to useless. Entirely useless. Okay. Caliphate, exactly. Like, the high-speed rail initiative is a glaringly obvious example of this. Basically, you know, the abundance bros will say, oh, it's the groups that are stopping it. It's like, no, it is the lack of interest from our government, California state government, in fully finishing this goddamn project. They just don't want to do it. They don't want to do it, so they let developers, private contractors, do whatever the fuck they want and hold their hands and just demand more payments in return for doing nothing. But the biggest issue is homelessness, born out of the housing market crisis. Liberals, I'm a white nationalist, but I don't exactly revere Robert E. Lee. You, on the other hand, are seemingly a civic nationalist, but revere him. I don't get it. Slavery is morally abhorrent. I would never want black people. I want black people out of my country, but would never enslave them. Oregon. This is just the average Oregonian, dude. This is how Oregon, the state, was designed, for the record. Like, that principle of, I don't want slavery only because that would require me to be around black people is unironically why the state of Oregon was designed. Chatters who say, wow, that's really, don't know the history of their own state, okay? That is quite literally how Oregon was designed. It was illegal to have slaves because it meant being around black people.
12406 requires the president to go through the governor, not just unilaterally summon the National Guard. And so federalizing the California National Guard without consent of the governor is ultra vires, which is law talk for outside the law and legally null and void. The suit says that at no point in the past 3 days has there been a rebellion or an insurrection, nor have these protests risen to the level of protests or riots that Los Angeles and other major cities have seen at points in the past, including in recent years. He contrasted it with the Rodney King riots, which involved thousands of people across Los Angeles County, resulting in multiple shootouts, over 60 deaths, thousands of people injured, and more than 12,000 arrests. The implication being that was an appropriate invocation of the Guard, and this is very clearly not. Newsom pointed out that federal officials did not provide the Los Angeles Sheriff Department or the LAPD with any notice as to the planned operations or otherwise attempt to coordinate activities to protect the safety of the public, which is why they had to call out for CHIPS to rescue them when they went looking for trouble and found it.
Someone could get hurt!
I'm kidding. It wasn't Dax Shepard riding to the rescue. It was these guys. But when ICE called, the LAPD did show up and protect ICE as requested. Newsom says that if ICE hadn't been deliberately provocative and freaked people out, then things wouldn't have gotten out of hand. He said agents engaged in military-style operations sparked panic in the community. In some instances, ICE agents were reportedly observed sealing off entire streets around targeted buildings and using unmarked armored vehicles equipped with paramilitary gear. He says that the LAPD and Sheriff Department have substantial training and experience responding to protests and large-scale riots and have been responding promptly, professionally, and effectively to the events unfolding in the city and county. Translation: there is no rioting or rebellion or insurrection, and unlike ICE, local law enforcement is trained to diffuse rather than inflame the situation. The complaint cites the ambiguous wording of President Trump's declaration, which suggests potential misuse of the federalized National Guard, since it's unclear what actions Secretary Hegseth will deem as reasonably necessary to ensure the protection and safety of federal personnel and property. It says that the Trump administration has made it clear that it intends to use National Guard members to effectuate interior civil immigration enforcement, and warns that violation of the Posse Comitatus Act is imminent, if not already underway, which is a big accusation. Or it would be if Trump weren't constantly going on television to talk about all the things he wants to do with those troops. Really? You need soldiers for this? In addition to filing the complaint over the weekend, on Tuesday morning, the state of California moved for an immediate temporary restraining order. The state argued that unless the court stepped in to stop the Trump administration, those federalized National Guardsmen would be used to perform ICE functions in violation of the Posse Comitatus Act. As State Attorney General Rob Bonta put it, the president and Secretary Hegseth have made clear, publicly and privately, that the Marines are not in Los Angeles to stand outside a federal building. Specifically, the state got word that those federalized troops would be holding a secure perimeter in communities around areas where immigration enforcement activities would take place and securing routes over public streets where immigration enforcement officers would travel. And that sounds a lot like crossing the line between supposedly defending ICE agents from protesters and actively aiding ICE in conducting raids, which would definitely violate the Posse Comitatus Act. And Hegseth more or less confirmed it, saying that 700 active duty U.S. Marines from Camp Pendleton are being deployed to Los Angeles to restore order. He also added a gratuitous dig at Newsom, claiming that we have an obligation to defend federal law enforcement officers, even if Gavin Newsom will not, which is kind of nuts, considering the LAPD turned out in force to scare off those hooligans throwing water bottles at the poor defenseless ICE agents. While AG Bonta may be right about what's about to happen,
like even the way, wow, poor defenseless, throwing water bottles at the poor defenseless ICE agents, like being said sarcastically by, again, a liberal lawyer is cool to see, unless I'm like misreading it, but I feel like she's being sarcastic about it, where she's like being sassy about how silly it is to cry and complain about ICE agents that have like gear having water bottles thrown at them.
Getting what's called anticipatory relief is a heavy lift. Typically, a temporary restraining order is used to preserve the status quo. Courts almost never issue a TRO to prevent conduct that might or might not happen. But that's not the end of the story. Just because the state might not get the immediate injunction does not mean they won't get one when and if the National Guard is used in a way that violates Posse Comitatus. And California has some very good legal arguments about the illegality of invoking Section 12406 and federalizing the Guard over the governor's objections. I mean, even if Trump can persuade a court that a rebellion is whatever he says it is, the plain language of Section 12406 requires that any federalization orders shall be issued through the governors of the states, and this one was not. And if Trump's federalization order was unlawful, that means the federal government has stolen resources that properly belong to the state of California. And we're heading into wildfire season when the state often needs to deploy the National Guard to actually help its citizens, which it won't be able to do if Pete Hegseth is dragging the National Guard around the country to form a human shield around ICE agents every time they think there might be a protest. The 10th Amendment says that the powers not delegated to the United States.
Wait, what? Did you misunderstand what I was saying? Do you think I'm promoting what ICE is doing? I'm not. I think violence is abhorrent. Like, I think that unaccountable, unelected, militarized high school graduates that are running amok in our beautiful city streets, kidnapping people simply so they can reach their Quotas is a horrifying act of violence. I don't think it's appropriate at all. Do you? It's despicable. I think it's gross.
By the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. That's federalism. And it means that the federal government cannot commandeer state resources to carry out federal policy.
They have quotas? Yes, they do. Ironically enough, in the most like liberal fashion, when Wall Street Journal actually released information about this back and forth that was going on with Steve Miller and department heads in ICE, Department of Homeland Security, they didn't say that Stephen Miller had, like, they implied that he actually said that there was a quota. And then Stephen Miller went on television and said, there is a quota. We want 3,000 people kidnapped a day. It was wild because like the Wall Street Journal was like, oh, well, you know, some anonymous figures that were in the meeting told us anonymously that like Stephen Miller greatly wanted to increase the number of deportations. He went on television a couple hours after that was released and said, we want 3,000 people deported a day. Obviously, that's not going to happen and it's impossible. You would need, I guess, what, like 300, 400,000 ICE agents? You would need 300,000 ICE agents to be able to do, you know, the kidnapping, one kidnapping every 2 minutes. Hasanabi is a troublemaker. Oh my God, this dude is literally 75 years old.
Here, it sure seems like the federal government is taking California's resource, i.e. its National Guard troops.
That would take 60,000 agents? No, I think it would be more. I think it'd be closer to 600,000 agents. Do you know how many people it takes to deport one person? Have you not? I mean, the New York Times Daily actually did a pretty decent piece on this earlier today. It came out earlier today. I was listening to it before the stream. And to get one guy, in a lot of circumstances, you need like multiple units. You need multiple cars. There's parked outside waiting for the point of apprehension. There's like 10 to 15 people for one guy. And it's not even a guarantee that they're going to be able to, it's not even a guarantee that they're going to be able to apprehend the guy to begin with. It's a unimaginably stupid use of resources.
In violation of the Constitution. So it's all kicking off and Trump seems pretty committed to the bit. Here he is at Fort Bragg taking credit for stopping a mob from burning down LA the way he single-handedly put out the wildfires by turning on the magical non-existent spigot of water. None of that happened. And yet, Trump seems dead.
Yeah, by the way, this is from military.com. Remember, chatters were asking me, like, where did you get the information that, like, Trump actually pre-screened the troops that were behind him? Military.com.
Set on pushing his version of LA as a violent hellscape where the LAPD is cowering in fear of hooligans, and the only thing that can save them is the U.S. military. Whose version of reality will win out? Will it be the Trump administration's dark vision of a city under siege, or the peaceful protesters sitting in the street singing Kumbaya? These are dark and dangerous times, and the summer is just beginning. Now, it's super interesting to see how the media is covering this. Over the weekend, over 380 sources.
Okay, the rest of it is ground news. Yeah, Middle Eastern news. Tensions are rising in Iran.